All right, here we are, part two. Apparently, I have so much music on my phone, I ran out of space. So, it's part two of the commentary, the second half of 1 Samuel chapter 18. Sorry about that. We're talking about foreskins. Yay. The foreskins were seen basically as a mark of their identity as God's chosen people. And so it was seen as them removing the foreskins was also seen, the Gentiles showing that God's dominion was over them. And again, their culture is a warrior-based shame and honor culture. It's funny, we 21st century secular Western culture has the idea within itself that, all truths are, everyone has the right to their own truth, and yet they actually don't believe that. There are certain ideas and values that they ascend higher than others. One of them is the idea of an individualistic idea, and that the individualism is not something valued in shame and honor culture at all. Shame and honor culture is all about the family. You do it the family, for the family's well-being, for the culture's well-being, for your nation's well-being. That is all bound up in their value system. So it's important to recognize, one, they just think differently than we do. Shame and honor culture, that's what you drive. You're trying to get honor for yourself and your people. Two, these are deeply religious ideas. The God that Israel worshipped was very different than the gods around them, and the gods around them were incredibly violent and sexual. It's the same thing in our world today. It's just more subtle, but sex and violence and promiscuity and worshiping individualism above individual rights. The pro-choice movement is really driven by making the individual higher than the actual value of the baby in the womb. Those ideas, it's important to acknowledge the lens and the reality lived in was different, and that it's, in many ways, it's not actually any worse than ours. We look at this and we say, oh, this is really violent, and yet they could make the argument, well, you guys abort babies, and that's really violent. You just do it in a room where no one sees it. And the other thing too is they just had no social structures to protect them, to protect themselves. You had to just protect yourself from people coming in and wreaking havoc on you. And so that was just a regular part of their day in life, right? They did not have any Green Berets, and they did not have drones, and they did not have a large body of water like we do. We have all these resources that protect us from, literally, we still have enemies, in the world that we're living in. And it's important to note that God does not condone these types of things necessarily, but God's sovereignty works through human history to accomplish his will. And it's important to recognize that the peak of God's will is Christ dying for the world and forgiving the world. And that's, Jesus came to forgive and came to reconcile heaven to earth. And that is like the peak revelation of God is that. But then there's also the revelation of God, of Jesus coming back on a white horse with a sword coming out of his mouth, and he's literally going to mop up his enemies. So, it is a violent account, and it is important to recognize completely different era, completely different culture. They were no worse than we were. It was just different, and it was very violent. And that's just the reality that David lives in. And so it says that David is pleased by this. So it says, when the servants told David these words, it pleased David well to be the king's son-in-law before the time expired. So Saul gave him a tight time frame, which is interesting. And I think it's to try to get David to recklessly throw himself to accomplish this. It says, it pleased David well to be the king's son-in-law before the time had expired. David arose and went along with his men and killed not 100, but 200 of the Philistines. And David brought back their foreskins, which were given in full numbers to the king, that he might become the king's son-in-law. And Saul gave his daughter Michal gave him Michal for a wife. Again, gross image, but if you can get past that, a comment for here is, in this picture, David is I believe a picture of Jesus, that there is a price on us. The price on us, the bride price for us was that he would allow, rather than him coming and killing his enemies, Jesus has to come and destroy his enemies, but he has to do it by himself being ripped apart, and that he presents himself before God as the sacrifice, and to buy us as his bride, the bride price for us. And rather than Saul, who wants to destroy David, God the Father wanted to unite us to the groom, which is Jesus, and to unite us to him. And that God the Father loves both Jesus and us. And so there's this weird kind of distorted version of reality. And that, notice, David saw it as a good thing. Jesus saw it as a good thing to come down and save us. And though he was afraid of the wrath that he was to experience and the pain, he still counted it joy to endure the shame and the pain of the cross and of the receiving the wrath for us. And so that's an amazing idea, that Jesus, when Jesus saw what was in front of him, just like when David saw, you have to kill 100 guys. It's incredible. David went above and beyond, just like Jesus went above and beyond. And that's why Jesus is exalted above every other name now as the Lion and the Lamb. And so, and then how does that apply to us? An application for that is when God gives you something to do, a task, and it's laid before you, you can go above and beyond. I was kind of convicted by this idea when I was reading the commentary on this, as I realized, sure, I tried to do well, but do I try to go twice as good, twice as well? Do I pour myself out? And sometimes I do, but sometimes I don't. And so how do I think it pleases God. I think it pleases God when you are given a task by him and you choose, one of the things, if I'm being really practical and honest, is like the ramen shop floor. I just realized it's gross, and this is Jesus's floor. Like every floor is Jesus' floor, but the ramen shop in particular is a place with which Jesus has clearly manifested himself to our community. And the kitchen is a primary way with which we do deliver the food to everyone. And I've just realized, getting down on my hands and knees and scrubbing the crap out of that floor is above and beyond, just really getting into it and trying to clean as best I can. And when I do it, I sense God's pleasure. And so that's just one teeny tiny area. It can apply to your marriage. It can apply to your relationships. It can apply to your Bible study or your prayer time or your fitness. I think Jesus threw himself into life and threw himself into whatever God called him to do. It didn't mean he wasn't afraid or nervous or needed strength from God or that he rested. He did all those things. But I think this is just a great application for us, is that David is a man of God. And so he goes above and beyond because he is delighted to serve the Lord and to serve the people around him. And so Saul gave him his daughter Michal for a wife. But when Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, again, says she loved him, Saul was even more afraid of David. So Saul was David's enemy continually. And then the commanders of the Philistines came out in battle, and as often as they came out to David, had more success than all the servants of Saul, so that his name was highly esteemed. It's important to note that when you serve Jesus, and we'll talk about this more as we move through, but it doesn't hurt to repeat it several times. In John 15, Jesus will talk about, I'll just read it to you, in verse 18, because you notice David is serving the Lord, and yet he is literally in the throne room of someone who hates him and is afraid of him. And Jesus will say this to you: if the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is you and I may come into seasons of our life where God will place us to serve him powerfully like David, and yet there will be people around us, that even maybe people that we are working for, who oppose us and do not want our well-being. And so that's just part of the reality that you and I live in. And so it says we have to grapple with that reality, right? And yet Jesus both in 1 Samuel 18 shows us how to do that well, which is to trust God and to still submit to the authorities, even if they don't have our well-being in mind. But then Jesus will reassure us that it's okay. He says, if you were of the world would love you of its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. So remember, when this happens, you are not alone, and it is not your fault. If you are truly following Jesus and serving him and trying to bring about his kingdom humbly, and that's key, When the world hates you, and when there's division and drama and things, you're being persecuted, you have to offload it to Jesus. Otherwise, you're going to crush under it or become incredibly resentful towards God and the people around you. And so a release valve for that is these words. Jesus saying, you are serving me, look to me. It's not because of you, it's because of me. So it's, at the end of the day, it comes down to you and your relationship with Jesus. He says, remember the word that I said to you, a servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. So this is just the reality. If you follow Jesus, your life may get, and most likely will get harder, because the world will hate you. It's not just sunshine and rainbows. If they kept my word, they will also keep yours. But all these things they will do to you on the account of my name, because they do not know him who sent me. If I had not come and spoken to them, they would have not been guilty of sin. But now they have no excuse for their sin. Whoever hates me hates my Father also. That's key. I'm getting a little far afield in the commentary, but just as believers, people are fine with the idea of God, but the moment you bring up Jesus, that's the real way to tell if someone hates God, is if they don't want to hear about Jesus. Sorry, you got to be okay with Jesus to be okay with God. If I had not done among them the works that no one else did, they would not be guilty of sin. But now they have seen and hated both me and my Father. But the word that is written in their law must be filled. They hated me without a cause. But when the Helper comes, I will send him to you from the Father, the Spirit of truth, who proceeds from the Father. He will bear witness about me, and you will also bear witness, because you have been with me from the beginning. So the Spirit will come along us and in us and around us, and will help us to serve and witness. Because, if we are to take David's life and apply it to ourselves, we are not to now go around taking a sword and hacking people to pieces. We are now have the Spirit of truth within us, and we are to share and speak Jesus and God and hope and the gospel to those around us, either gently or forcefully, always with compassion and creativity. And so we need that Spirit to come alongside of us as we move out in a world that potentially will hate us. And again, it's not because of us, it's because of Jesus. It's all Jesus' fault. It's Jesus' fault that we're saved and that heaven and earth is coming. It's Jesus' fault that we're hated. And so I know that was a lot, but I figured this is a great opportunity for me to just kind of give you a more verse-by-verse teaching commentary. And so I hope that was helpful. Let me end in prayer. Jesus, I just thank you for your word that is living and sharp and active. I just pray that you would show us yourself through David and through the circumstances of his life, and that you would empower us to be warriors like you. You fought the good fight, just like David fought the good fight. And though we do not wage war against flesh and blood, we do against the spiritual realm. And so I just pray that this passage would teach us how to forgive. It would teach us how to go to war and to be gracious and humble and not assert ourselves. And that you would also teach us how to trust you and be around those people when they hate us. In your name, amen. All right. Hope you have a great week, and hopefully I'll see you Sunday.